I rise in favor of immigration reform. The current immigration system is a travesty. It's inefficient, it's uncompassionate, and it's dangerous. It doesn't serve America's economic or social interests, and it undermines respect for the rule of law, while simultaneously undermining respect for our democratic institutions. Comprehensive reform is both badly needed and long overdue. The comprehensive immigration reform I envision includes real border security, visa modernization, employment verification, robust programs for both high and low-skilled workers, and a compassionate approach to addressing the needs of those currently in the country illegally. But I believe that each of these vital components must be addressed incrementally and sequentially in order to ensure meaningful results. Now, I understand our reluctance to admit it, but Congress is simply very, very bad at overhauling and creating massive bureaucratic systems all at once. Every new law, no matter how big, carries with it some unintended consequences. And the bigger the law, the more accidental problems that we tend to create. History teaches us that trying to fix lots of problems all at once is the surest way to avoid fixing any of them very well. Obamacare is and will continue to make our health care system worse, not better. It promised to lower health insurance premiums, yet they're exploding all across the country. The Dodd-Frank financial reform measure was supposed to end too big to fail and prevent another financial meltdown. And yet, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac are still on the taxpayers' books, and today, the very biggest banks on Wall Street are bigger than ever. Did the American people have any idea that the Patriot Act would empower the National Security Agency to spy on all Americans through their cell phones and their computers? What makes any of us, least of all any conservative, believe this immigration bill is going to work out any better? The lesson we should be taking from our recent mistakes is not that we need to pass better, huge, sweeping new laws, but that we should instead undertake major necessary reforms incrementally, one step at a time, and in the proper sequence. We need to face the fact that 1,000-page bureaucratic overhauls simply do not achieve their desired goals, and they create far more problems than they tend to solve. We can achieve comprehensive immigration reform without having to pass another 1,000-page bill full of loopholes, carve-outs, and unintended consequences. Therefore, from my perspective, there's no one amendment that can fix this bill. Indeed, there's no series of tinkering changes that will turn this mess of a bill into the reform the country needs and that Americans deserve. The only way to guarantee successful reform of the entire system is through a series of incremental reforms that ensure the foundational pieces, like the border security pieces and an effective entry-exit system, are done first and done correctly. Such a common-sense process will allow Congress, and more importantly, will allow the American people to monitor policy changes as they're implemented with each step. That way, we can isolate and fix unintended consequences before they grow out of control and before we move on to the next phase. A step-by-step approach would also allow Congress to move quickly on those measures on which Republicans and Democrats both tend to agree. We ought not hold common sense and essential measures hostage to unavoidably contentious ones, and that's what this bill does. Both sides largely agree on many essential elements. These measures are relatively uncontroversial and could pass incrementally, with broad bipartisan support in Congress. Indeed, the only reason immigration reform is controversial is that Congress refuses to adopt the incremental approach. That is why true immigration reform must be pursued step by step, with individual reform measures implemented and verified in the proper sequence. Happily for immigration reformers like me, this appears to be the approach being pursued by the House of Representatives. It's the only one that makes sense. First of all, let's secure the border. Let's set up a workable entry-exit system and create a reliable employment verification system that protects immigrants, protects citizens, and protects businesses from bureaucratic mistakes. Then let's fix our legal immigration system to make sure we're letting in the immigrants our economy needs in numbers that make sense for our country. There's no good reason why we must, or even why we should, try to do these things all at once, all in one bill, all in the same legislative package. Once these and other tasks, which are plenty big enough themselves, in and of themselves, are completed to the American people's satisfaction, then we can address the needs of current undocumented workers with justice, compassion, and sensitivity. Since the beginning of this year, more than 40 immigration-related bills have been introduced in the House and the Senate. By a rough count, I could support more than half of them. 8 of them have Republican and Democratic co-sponsors. We should not risk progress on these and other bipartisan reforms simply because we're unable to iron out each and every one of the more contentious issues. This is not the bill to fix our immigration system. Now, I want to pass immigration reform. I want to debate immigration reform. And that is exactly why we should not proceed to the Gang of 8 bill. We're being presented with a choice between the Gang of 8 bill or nothing. Common sense, recent history, and the ongoing legislative process of the House of Representatives confirm that that is a false choice. There is another way. It's a more sensible and a more successful way. We can do better than another 1,000-page mistake. Haven't we learned our lesson in this regard? Isn't it time that we tried? Rather than fix our current immigration problems, the Gang of 8 bill will make many of them worse. It's not immigration reform, it's big government dysfunction. All advocates of true immigration reform, on the left and on the right, should oppose it. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor and note the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.